Picture this. You're in the practice room. You've been working on this one phrase for weeks. You know the notes, you know the words, and then you get to that moment, the high note, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a thought appears, don't crack. And what happens? You hesitate, or you over-control, you grip, and sometimes because of that thought alone, you get exactly the result you were trying to avoid. This is not a technique problem, this is a mindset problem. And today we're going to talk about how to fix it. Welcome to Your Passaggi Professor, a podcast for singers who want tools to bridge the gap between the hard skills we learn in music school and the soft skills we need to live focused, intentional lives. I'm your host, Sarah Neely, voice professor, director, and certified life coach. Each week, we'll talk about mindset, emotional regulation, boundaries, and more so you can navigate the passaggi of your life both on and off the stage. Last week in episode 12, we laid the foundation about what self-confidence actually is, why it's so hard to build, and what's really going on at the belief level when we feel like we don't have enough of it. And if you haven't listened to that one yet, I encourage you to go back and start there because everything we're doing today builds on it. We're taking all of that conceptual groundwork and bringing it into the practice room and onto the stage. So specifically, we're going to talk about how to actually build confidence through your daily work as a singer and how the thoughts you're thinking while you practice are either building that confidence or quietly working against it. Let's get to it. In episode 12, I said something I want to revisit briefly because I think it could create some confusion when we bring it into the practice room context. And that is that your opinion of yourself doesn't have to be proven. Self-confidence is just a thought, and you get to decide what that thought is, independent of evidence. And while that is true, it is also true that in the practice room, we want to be actively collecting evidence so that we can trust ourselves. And we want to notice when something works, when the coordination clicks, when the phrase lands the way we intended. And we want to train our brains to find proof that we're capable. And so those two things might seem like they're in conflict, and they're not. But here's the distinction. The foundational belief is simply that you can figure it out, not that you've already figured it out. Not that you can sing a high C every single time without cracking, but that you're capable of learning, growing, and building the skills you need to be able to do that. The belief doesn't require proof. It just requires a decision. And from that foundation, all of the work in the practice room, the reps, the trial and error, the small wins, become evidence that stack up on top of something that was already solid. You're not building confidence from nothing every day. You're reinforcing a belief that was already there. And that shift is what allows you to relax and trust the process, to stay curious instead of anxious. And it's the difference between practicing from fear and practicing from intention, right? So it can be very easy to use all of the evidence of when it didn't go to plan. But what we are aiming to do is to change our belief that we can figure it out and that those moments are just part of the process. And then every time we do have a win, we're really hanging on to that evidence to continue to snowball that momentum and energy and motivation through that focus. So let's talk about the practice room, because I think this is where confidence is actually built or broken, long before you even walk out onto a stage. And I want you to think about a moment you've been working on something hard, a tricky passage, a high note, a phrase that keeps not quite landing for whatever reason. And I want you to notice what you're thinking right before you sing it. For a lot of singers, that thought sounds something like, don't crack, or please just work, or, oh, here comes the part I always fall apart. And here's what the model tells us. And if you've been listening for a while, you know what I mean by the model. It's that our thoughts create our feelings create a physical response in our bodies, and that physical response drives our actions, which produce our results. So when the thought is don't crack, the feeling that creates is probably anxiety or dread or even hypervigilance. And what does anxiety feel like in your body as you're singing? Tension, held breath, a grabbed or over-controlled larynx or support muscles, a hesitation right at the moment when you actually need to just commit and go. The thought, don't crack the high note, is literally producing the crack. So now, what if the thought were something like, I've done the work. I trust my preparation. I'm going to commit to this phrase and find out what happens. And what does that thought create in your body? Well, probably it's more grounded, more ready and open. And what does that produce? A completely different physical setup for singing. And this is not magic. This is the model applied to technique. And it requires you to develop the skill of noticing in real time in the practice room what you're thinking, what that thought is creating in your body, and whether that is serving the sound you're trying to make. Your thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations are all connected. Learning to track that connection is one of the most powerful things you can do as a singer. And now we're going to get really practical, because there's a time in the practice room for analytical, detail-oriented work, and there's a time to put that brain down and just sing. And I like to think of these two modes as like technical brain and performance brain. And learning to move between them intentionally is a skill in itself. So technical brain is when you're building the coordination. You're focusing on your breath, your resonance vowels, your registration. You're working methodically, phrase by phrase, step by step, rhythms, pitches, words, diction, all those things. And you're asking yourself, is this working? What needs to adjust? This is like engineering brain, like building self-awareness of physical adjustments. And performance brain is when you put the engineer brain down and you become the artist. You trust that the coordination is there because you've done the work. And you focus entirely on telling the story. You're not monitoring your jaw. You're not listening for the high note coming. You're in the moment of expression. And most of us are very good at one of these mindsets and not the other. Singers who struggle with performance anxiety are often incredibly skilled at technical brain, and they've spent years developing it, but they haven't practiced performance brain with the same intentionality. And here's what I mean by practicing performance brain. In every single practice session, you should spend some time just performing. Not fixing, not evaluating in the moment, just singing through, trusting what you've built, and recording yourself so that you can evaluate after the fact. That separation, doing, and then evaluating at a different time is really essential. When you try to do both simultaneously, you're asking two incompatible parts of your brain to run at the same time, and it doesn't work as well. And it will always undermine your confidence. And that's one more distinction I want to add here, because I think it's one of the most practically useful things I can offer you. Along with technical brain and performance brain, there's a third mode that is the hijacker of our brains when we're singing, and I call it audience brain. Audience brain is when you're performing, but you're also watching yourself perform. You're in the middle of a phrase and simultaneously sitting in the back row judging it. Is it good enough? Did that sound right? What does my face look like? And I want to tell you, that mode will always lead to more tension, more self-judgment, and less freedom in your body. Always. Because you cannot fully express something and evaluate it at the same time. Those are two different jobs that can't run simultaneously without one of them suffering. So what I try to remind myself when I notice I've slipped into audience brain is this. I have something to give. My job right now is to express something true and to connect with the people in the room and to trust that it's going to reach someone. And that shift helps me get out of watching myself to giving a gift to someone else. And that changes my physical experience almost immediately. So try that next time you have a performance. Focus your energy on expressing meaning outward instead of judging your own performance while you're in the middle of it. And here's where we come to a concrete way to help build confidence in a structured way. I think one of the reasons singers don't build practice room confidence is because they just don't have a structure, and we don't know how. So without a process, our practice becomes like aimless noodling or anxious repetition, and neither of those builds confidence. So I have a song learning process that I use with my students and myself, and I want to walk you briefly through the mindset layer of it. Because the process moves in stages. Start with text and then rhythm, and then you add pitches, and all the while you're building step by step your foundation of how you want to manage pronunciation and resonance and breath and body. And each stage has its own focus, and the idea is that you complete one stage thoroughly before you move to the next. You're not trying to perform something you haven't learned yet. You're not trying to fix the expression while you're still figuring out the notes. But here's the mindset piece that I think is often missing in our practice. At every stage, especially when you're working on pitch and coordination, your job is to notice what's happening in your body. Is your breath pressure consistent? Is there tension anywhere? And crucially, what are you thinking while you do it? And the final stage is where we practice performing. This is where you deliberately put technical brain down, you record yourself, and you sing through it without being an audience brain, without being in technical brain. You don't try to fix anything, but then after the fact, you evaluate it. You watch the video back and you evaluate, did the coordination hold? Did the technical things that you practiced when you were in technical brain mode, did those stick? Did the trust I built in earlier steps carry through when I stopped thinking about it? And that last step is where confidence is actually forged. Because what you're proving to yourself over and over again is that the work you did in technical mode holds up when you let go of it. And eventually, not overnight, but over time, your nervous system starts to believe it. This is a process, right? The first time you learn a tough phrase and then you try to sing it not in technical brain mode, not every technical thing that you worked on is going to be perfect yet. But you have to not skip the step of building the trust. And you keep working closer and closer to getting to that point where tools and skills you practiced are sticking and you know that you can trust them because you've tested it in the practice room before you've gotten on stage. James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, he has a really great quote that says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And I think about that a lot in the practice room, especially after a performance that didn't go the way you hoped. When something goes wrong, a memory slip or a phrase that fell apart under pressure or a moment where you felt your confidence disappear, there's a window right after that experience where the information is still fresh and available to you, where you need to reflect on what happened. Where did it go sideways? What was the thought you were thinking right before that moment? If you close that window too quickly or you avoid evaluating it because the failure feels uncomfortable, you lose all of that amazing data. And without the data, you can't build a better system. Remember, I talk about this a lot. We got to treat stuff like the scientific method. So it's just data. It's not personal. It's not feeling based. And that helps us stay in a more grounded and calm place. And so this is where, recording yourself and reviewing it right away after is not just a practice technique, but this is part of confidence building. Not because watching yourself back is comfortable. It's not. But because it closes the loop. It allows you to immediately turn that setback into a strategy. And having a system that you trust to catch and learn from your mistakes is itself a source of confidence, because you stop being afraid of what a bad performance means and start seeing it as the next piece of information in a process that's always moving you forward. Remember, direction is always better than perfection, because there's no such thing as perfection. So I'm going to be offering a more detailed version of my song learning process as a resource for you. So keep your eye out for that. And then, all of that practice room work that we've just talked about is super essential. And it has to be tested under pressure, because confidence that only exists in the practice room is not really confidence. It's just comfort. And comfort and confidence are not the same thing. This is where my Brené Brown fangirl comes out, because she says the middle is messy, but it's also where the magic happens. And really performing in front of people under pressure when the stakes feel real is the messy middle of building confidence as a singer. Every studio class you show up for, every master class, every recital, every audition, even the ones that don't go the way you hoped, is giving you data. It's giving you information about where your technique and your trust are solid and where there's still work to do. And just as importantly, it's proving to you that you can feel the anxiety and sing anyway. That you can crack the high note in front of people and survive it and come back the next week. That's immersion therapy. And the more you do it, the smaller the gap becomes between who you are in the practice room and who you are on stage. But only if you are practicing with intentionality and doing things that are going to help you translate the setback into a strategy for the next performance. So I want to end on one more thing, because I think it's one of the heaviest weights a singer carries. And it doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion. And that is that rejection in this field is constant. Auditions, applications, casting decisions, they are all relentless stream of other people's opinions about your work. And if you've tied your self-worth to those opinions, every rejection is not just a disappointment, it's a confirmation of your worst fear about yourself. And I want to tell you something I know from being on the other side of the table. The vast majority of casting decisions have nothing to do with rejecting you. They are about choosing someone else for a combination of reasons that include voice type, physical presence, scheduling, ensemble balance, the director's vision, and 100 other factors that have nothing to do with your value as a singer or a human being. Not everyone can get cast every time. And when you learn to separate your belief in your own worth from any individual casting outcome, something genuinely shifts, not because rejections stop hurting, they don't, but because they stop meaning something they were never meant to mean. You show up differently, your energy changes, your creativity opens up because you're no longer auditioning to prove you're worthy. You already know you are. You are there to show them what you can do. And that is self-confidence in action. So here's what I want you to take into your practice room this week. Notice the thoughts you're thinking before you attempt the hard thing. Notice what those thoughts create in your body. Ask yourself, is this thought building the coordination I need, or is it working against me? Practice switching between technical brain and performance brain deliberately in every session. And when you catch yourself in audience brain, redirect. You have something to give. Focus on giving it. It's a gift. Give yourself the gift of the messy middle. Show up to the studio class. Do the audition. Perform the thing before you feel ready. Because the waiting to feel ready is the thing that keeps confidence out of reach. You don't wait to feel confident and then act. You act and confidence follows. That is what this whole 2-part series has been building toward, and I hope it serves you. I'll see you next week. Take good care of yourselves. Thank you so much for listening to Your Passaggi Professor with Sarah Neely. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen. This really helps the podcast reach more singers just like you. And if you're ready to learn the life skills that smooth the Passaggi of your life, you can follow me on Instagram at your_Passaggi_professor. That's Passaggi with 2 S's and 2 G's. There's a link in my bio where you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter and learn more about working with me. See you next time.